This episode of Bullet Heaven was made possible with a copy of the game provided by Strictly Limited Games. This classy box has all kinds of style and a ton of great content. With the same design cues found on PCB boxes from years past, the Space Invaders Invincible Collection Limited Edition houses all kinds of goodies, though not as extensive as other more superfluous ones that include dishes or even board games. This particular edition hits a happy medium. In addition to the PCB-style outer box, another collector's box with a slipcover and a magnetic flap is found inside. It, itself, contains all kinds of great extras, 2 full soundtrack CDs, a number of cocktail cabinet-style replica instruction cards, a sheet of Space Invaders stickers, and of course, the game itself. There's even more though, a set of replica arcade flyers, an excellent hardcover book filled with all kinds of great Space Invaders history and factoids, and a set of acrylic panels round out this great package. As with Strictly Limited Games' other releases, it even came with a collectible postcard and a great enamel pin. But what about the game itself? That's arguably the most important part after all. In this episode of Bullet Heaven, we're taking a look at the Space Invaders Invincible Collection from Strictly Limited Games. Space Invaders Invincible Collection is a compilation of classic fixed shooting games with releases spanning over 40 years. It was originally released by Taito for the Nintendo Switch in Japan on March 23, 2020. It included 8 games in the Standard Edition and 11 in the Special Edition, one of which, in the case of Arkanoid vs. Space Invaders, was obtained through a download code included with each version. An extra game, the Mega Drive-based Space Invaders 90, was also given as a pre-order bonus from Amazon Japan. It wouldn't be until August 17, 2021 that the Space Invaders Invincible Collection would be released to the Nintendo eShop worldwide, though it never had the opportunity to include Space Invaders 90, which we've taken a look at back in episode 127 as Space Invaders 91 on the Sega Genesis. It included all of the games found in the special edition of the game, which completely eclipses Einen's previous 2020 release, Space Invaders Forever. With a physical version made available from Strictly Limited Games, Western players can also adorn their shelves with a hard copy of the game, which is where we're picking up. Let's take a closer look. While the 1962 PDP-1 microcomputer title Space War could be argued as being the first shoot-'em-up video game ever made, Space Invaders is still generally accepted as the origin point for modern shooting games in both the arcade and home console settings. As a fixed shooter, the controls are extremely simple and have carried over not only to a vast array of games taking inspiration, or blatantly ripping off the formula, but also to brand new games within the series. It's incredibly simple. Players take on progressively more aggressive waves of invaders that move left and right and shift down one row as they reach either side of the screen. The fewer invaders there are, the faster they'll move and the harder they'll be to hit. When each wave is cleared, a new one begins. The invaders will fire various bullets at the player, from which they can use buildings as cover. Some bullets can also be cleared by player shots, while others cannot. If the invaders make it to the bottom of the screen, the player loses a life. Players move their gunner left or right using the control input and fire with any button. The player can typically only fire one shot at a time. Another can't be fired until the previous one hits a target, an enemy bullet, or leaves the playfield. That's literally it. Some games later on added functions and power-ups to the mix with a second input, and all kinds of twists to the formula have been added as the series progressed through generation after generation. But ultimately, any one Space Invaders game at all is, at its core, the same as the 1978 original from a control standpoint. But when it comes to the control of this particular collection, there is unfortunately a touch of noticeable input delay that is present in all games, both in handheld and docked. This will likely affect players with a lower response time monitor even more, and while it's mostly manageable, it'll still make the gameplay more difficult than it needs to be as a result. On the bright side though, in addition to playing each game as one might expect, all of the games it collects also has an added layer of modernization in the form of online leaderboards and challenges with various rule conditions such as time and life limits paired with difficult waves and special requirements like triggering rainbow invaders. It adds a lot of replay to the package on the whole, especially when one of the games really clicks. Despite its black and white display, 4-digit score limit, and absolutely primitive gameplay by today's standards, Space Invaders was simply mind-blowing at the time of its release, revolutionizing the gaming industry as more than just a passing fad. A number of cabinets existed, including the black and white original version, a cellophane overlaid version, a true color version, and cocktail cabinets that would end up replacing tables in cafes all over Japan. The color version of the game has various enhancements. Its color graphics were obviously a step up from the original black and white and cellophane cabinets, but it was also the first Japanese video game to use a microprocessor. It also added an additional digit to the player's score potential, allowing for higher scores to be obtained. Simple though the game may be, it's still quite challenging. Some of the glitches in the original Space Invaders would also become staples of the series, and often tied to bonuses, such as the Nagoya attack, where players can clip an invisible enemy bullet while attacking the invader that shot it, and Rainbow, where the final invader leaves a trail behind it as it speeds toward the player. Released in 1979, Space Invaders Part 2 follows the same general template that the first releases did, but adds additional mechanics like splitting invaders and reinforcements to the mix. New bonuses like the Rainbow Shower can also be achieved as a direct result of the previous game's popular Rainbow attack. The game's stages are also displayed in the game's buildings, letting players know where they are at a glance. This was also the first Japanese arcade game to save player scores on a local leaderboard, as well as the first Japanese game to be protected by copyright. Also released in 1979, this isn't really a Space Invaders game, but still significant due to its development. Lunar Rescue was developed on exactly the same board as Space Invaders was. The invaders also make a cameo. The gameplay is otherwise completely different. Players first have to descend to the moon while avoiding a field of asteroids. Getting hit will result in a life lost. The player can slow their descent by engaging a rocket, which allows for greater precision, though this comes at the cost of fuel. Landing on platforms of various point values, the player then picks up an astronaut waiting to be rescued. Upon picking one up, the player must then traverse the playfield again to dock with the mothership at the top of the screen while dealing with a bunch of UFOs. Enemy ships can be shot in an effort to clear a path, and holding the shot button will allow the player to climb faster, once again at the cost of fuel. If the player misses the docking bay though, they'll lose their passenger, and points in the process. It's a decent bit of fun, actually, even though it's still a very primitive game. Released in 1980, Space Cyclone was also developed on the same board as Space Invaders, but because so many other titles were being made on newer, more advanced hardware, Space Cyclone ended up becoming pretty rare. This is actually its first home console release. It's a lot of fun too, even if some of its gameplay elements are a little janky when compared to a game like Lunar Rescue. The insectoid cyborgs have a choppy, jittery movement that can be really hard to deal with, and can often lead to some dumb deaths. But once this is acclimated to, there are some really neat features. The player will have to work through enemy waves that travel on floating asteroids. The total number remaining is displayed at the top of the screen. Enemies will gradually work their way towards the player while firing their own bullets, and while any enemy that reaches the bottom of the screen won't kill the player, they will contribute to the construction of a boss character of sorts. When he is completed, he'll launch onto the playfield firing a death beam at the player. Larger UFOs and insectoids will also sometimes appear to accost the player with challenging fire. These more challenging enemies are often preceded by a voiceover clip warning of their arrival. In addition to its voice clips, Space Cyclone also features a dash of edutainment between stages with various real constellations hidden in the starfield for players to find. All in all, this is one of the more fun early title games that we've played, and we found that there's actually pretty decent potential for progress in the online leaderboards here as well.
Gotcha.
Majestic 12 is the fourth game in the Space Invaders series after Return of the Invaders, which sadly isn't included here. However, Majestic 12 is arguably a much more significant title, as it would lay down a template for a number of other games such as Space Invaders 90 on the Mega Drive and Space Invaders Plus included with Fukatsu no Hi on the PC Engine. In addition to its greatly overhauled visuals, it adds power-ups, branching paths, faux scrolling stages, exotic waves, boss invaders, and two-player co-op to the mix, allowing for a friend to join in on the action. And, of course, there's the cattle mutilation bonus stages, one of the most memorable things in Space Invaders ever. not to be confused with Space Invaders 90 and 91 for the Sega Mega Drive and Genesis respectively. See Bullet Heaven 127 for more. Space Invaders 91 Arcade is essentially just Majestic 12, but with the branching stage choice removed. Players will have to tackle every stage in the game one after another until the very end. This makes for a much more difficult clear compared to MJ12, but it makes for a good challenge for hardcore players. It was far more popular in Europe and North America than it was in Japan. Space Invaders DX was released in 1994 and featured a number of different modes. A classic mode with upright, black and white, cellophane, and colored modes. A versus mode where players would square off with each other similar to the later Twinkle Star Sprites. And a parody mode featuring characters and visuals based on several Taito franchises, such as New Zealand Story, Darius, Arkanoid, and more. Unlike most of the Space Invaders games that saw release to arcade, Space Invaders DX is a Yoko-oriented game, based primarily on the Super Famicom version of Space Invaders the original game, which was released the same year but lacked the parody mode. Parody and verses are definitely the main draws here though, and verses in particular can be a very fun time with friends.
Rate up.
Space Invaders Xtreme represents the most recent full Space Invaders experience available. First released on the Nintendo DS and PlayStation Portable in 2008 for Space Invaders' 30th anniversary, it would later be released to the Xbox 360 as a live arcade title. Its most recent release outside of the Invincible Collection was on Steam for Space Invaders' 40th anniversary. It sports upgrades and refinements that put it head and shoulders above any other version of the game. We took a look at both the PSP and Steam versions extensively, so for the full deets on both, be sure to check out episodes 153 and 198 respectively. Needless to say, Space Invaders Xtreme is the ultimate evolution of the series with its Darius-style branching stage set, huge wealth of scoring opportunities, streamlined power-up system, and incredible audiovisual chops. Space Invaders Xtreme fills out this release nicely and injects perhaps the most value of any of the titles here to this collection.
Rate up.
Next up, we have Space Invaders Gigamax 4 SE, based on a 40th anniversary event arcade game that featured an ultra-wide playfield, a gigantic amount of invaders and invader types, challenging bosses, and co-op multiplayer for up to 10 players at once. Some versions supported up to 20 friggin' players. Holy shit! However, the 4SE version is locked to only 4 players, much more conservative, but still fun nonetheless. This makes for quite the experience, especially with 3 friends. Not only can players make quick work of the invaders on screen, they can level up to fire more shots at once, and even combine powers with other players to inflict heavy damage, which is especially useful during the game's boss encounters. There's an emphasis on team play and speed kills in Gigamax 4 SE, and while there are comparatively few stages, it also makes for an excellent party game for the discerning Space Invaders fan. Add to that some great music from Zuntata, and Gigamax 4 SE makes for a pretty memorable experience. Finally, as an added bonus to this collection, a separate game also appears on the Switch home screen when the card is plugged in. The Arkanoid Space Invaders crossover, Arkanoid vs. Space Invaders. This is a game that was originally released on iOS and Android phones in 2017. The Switch version of the game is played exclusively in handheld mode using touchscreen controls only, which is a bit of a shame considering the PlayStation 4 version is more traditionally playable on a TV or monitor. It's somehow both surprising and not entirely unexpected, but also pretty disappointing. Arkanoid vs. Space Invaders is an interesting amalgamation of the two gameplay concepts. The breakout-style gameplay of Arkanoid has always had a touch of shooting to it from the beginning, so it's a pretty natural fit. What's really interesting is the ability to move the Voss with a small amount of vertical travel in order to power up and smash an attack at an enemy for increased damage or penetration. A ton of characters and abilities can be unlocked through various conditions in the game, much like the mobile game it is based on, but with less of the grind thanks to the lack of microtransactions these mobile games are often centered around. It's actually a lot of fun, and the amalgamation of Arkanoid's Voss versus an array of invaders works pretty well for casual play. Of course, it's also designed for play on mobile phones, so that shouldn't be too surprising. But we really would have preferred it playable like the PlayStation 4 version found in Space Invaders Forever. There's no real excuse for it not to be there. Space Invaders Invincible Collection as a compilation is fairly straightforward, with a flashy title splash screen and a classy game selection menu offering players both basic information and intriguing factoids. Navigation is both super easy and visually engaging. Each game is also tastefully presented with its own wallpaper and clear, sharp scaling. Options like tate screen rotation, scan lines, control tweaking with variable cycle rapid fire, and general game options like lives difficulty and more can be easily accessed and changed by pressing the plus button in most modes. There's plenty of hot jams throughout the collection as well, especially in the case of the main menu, Majestic 12, Xtreme, and Gigamax for SE. The rest of the early games all have very primitive yet equally recognizable and iconic sound that have been heard for nearly half a century, even in games from completely different developers in the late 70s and early 80s. All in all, the collection is great, though not as good as it could have been. Admittedly, we miss Return of the Invaders and Space Invaders 95, both of which were featured prominently in Space Invaders Pocket on the PlayStation Portable. It would have been neat to have a new version of Space Invaders Galaxy Beat with its hilariously out-of-place soundtrack that belongs in an adult film. Or Space Invaders Infinity Gene with its crazy branching stage progression. Or like the special games from the PlayStation 2 Space Invaders Anniversary Collection, or Fukatsu no Hi, or one of the Game Boy ones, or heck, even a port of the obscenely expensive Virtual Boy version. Space Invaders 90 is also sorely missed in this regard. It would have been nice if it was included with the Western release and not simply a pre-order bonus from Amazon in Japan. This may be the biggest compilation there's been so far for Space Invaders, but it isn't as comprehensive nor as definitive as it could have been, especially at this price point. Still, what's here is definitely great, and still a worthwhile collection for old and new fans alike. So, how does Space Invaders Invincible Collection stack up? Let's take a look. The control in Space Invaders Invincible Collection is reasonably responsive but suffers from discernible, albeit brief, input delays. Space Invaders looks simple, and to a point it is, but it's also deceptively challenging no matter the version you're playing. Space Invaders Xtreme, unsurprisingly, is the most balanced of the lot. With a total of 11 games, some more extensive than others, there's a huge amount of content to chew through here, and the additional score attack and challenge modes only add to it. The visuals in the Invincible Collection are accurate and tastefully presented with all kinds of visual tweaks and screen sizes available. The general design of the game menu is also top-notch. The iconic sounds of classic Invaders and the hot new jams in Xtreme and Gigamax give the collection a fine balance between old and new from an audio standpoint. Compilations are generally a pretty easy thing to pull together, and while the addition of online and challenge scoring is pretty great by all accounts, some little things still bother us, like how Arkanoid vs. Space Invaders is a separate game on the home screen, or how it can't be played on a monitor like the version included in the PlayStation 4 version of Space Invaders Forever. Let me play it on a TV, come on. At about $60 US, the Space Invaders Invincible Collection is of a relatively high cost. If Space Invaders Xtreme, Gigamax, and Arkanoid vs. Space Invaders are your main draw, the cheaper Space Invaders Forever might be a better fit. However, the addition of Majestic 12, Space Invaders 91, Lunar Rescue, and the rare Space Cyclone in addition to those give the Invincible Collection a good value. And while they may cost more, the extras in the collector's editions are simply excellent, and longtime fans will definitely want them in their library. All in all, while its lack of certain significant titles makes it less comprehensive than it honestly should have been, the games it collects are adequate, and make for a fantastic journey through over 40 years of shooting history that continues to this day. It has minor performance issues, sure, but generally speaking, Space Invaders Invincible Collection is a compilation that's well worth playing. You can get the Space Invaders Invincible Collection on the Nintendo eShop with physical editions available from strictly limited games. Links for all of them below. I hope you're ready for even more Taito action because G-Darius HD is just about to launch in North America, and it's coming up next on Bullet Heaven. We'll see you all in the next episode.